Uh, Hello and welcome. I'm Felice Gelman. I'm part of the Middle East crisis response in the Hudson Valley, and I want to welcome you all to Holding Our Ground, Resisting Colonialism and Environmental Destruction. This is one of a series of panels that we've tried to put together on really the vital issues that are facing people resisting oppression. And it's so clear that the struggles around the world are in many ways the same fight. Um, so I want to thank our panelists today, Sleydo, Gidimt'en, and Mazin Qumsiyeh for joining us. And I want to thank our co-sponsors and the people who worked on this panel, Jewish Voice for Peace in Hudson Valley, the Middle East Crisis Response, New York Veterans for Peace, Women in Black, New Paltz, and the U.S. Boat to Gaza. And I want to thank Ellen Davidson for that amazing slideshow. It was really tremendous. But before we go further, let's take a minute to think about where we stand. Here in the mid-Hudson, we stand on the land of others, on the land of the Lenape people, and particularly the Esopus band, who before the European settlers came, that numbered at least 10,000 people in the Kingston area. European settlers began displacing the native people as early as 1650, and by 1663 had driven them off their land, burning their crops, killing their chief, and dispersing them in all directions. And their descendants today live in diaspora in Wisconsin, in Canada, and in northern New Jersey, among other places. So I think that this acknowledgement is not just an acknowledgement, it brings us to our topic today, which is actually resisting settler colonialism and environmental destruction. Knowing our history is good. Refusing to repeat it is better. And we know that settler colonialism has radically changed the land, displaced and erased peoples and cultures, extracted resources from the land with little or no care for the environment or for the future. And indigenous people striving to protect their culture and their land are the heart of resistance to environmental destruction. So hopefully today we will learn how people in North America and in Palestine are resisting and how we can be allies in that struggle. We'll hear from two speakers relatively briefly. I know there's so much to say, but relatively briefly, and then we'll have some time for questions. So our speakers today are going to be Sleydo Gidimt'en and Mazin Qumsiyeh. We'll have some time for questions. Put them in the chat, please. And let me introduce our first speaker, who is Sleydo Gidimt'en. She is the spokesperson for the Gidimt'en Checkpoint, which is a reoccupation site established in 2018. She's a member of the Qumsiyeh, or Grizzly House, of the Wet'suwet'en people, and she has reoccupied her territory since 2014, not without a constant struggle. She and the Wet'suwet'en people have stood against the Canadian government's efforts to steal their land to build a pipeline with no consent from those people to the west coast of Canada to export fracked gas. So, Sleydo, if you would talk a little bit, and then after 15 minutes or so, we'll hand it over to Mazin, and I will introduce him then. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank everybody who's organized this panel. These are really important topics, and I'm grateful to be here to share a little bit of our story. My name is Sleydo. My English name is Molly Wickham, and I hold that name in the Qumsiyeh Grizzly House of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. As Felice had said, I've been reoccupying my territory with my family, my husband and my 3 children, and since 2014. This has come after a long history of colonization, not as long as other places in the world. In our area, actually relatively short. Our people have have contact and colonization for about the last 150 years in our territories. There have been many policies put in place in so-called Canada that have been designed to remove us from our territories, and our people have suffered greatly at the hands of those policies. They all fall under the Indian Act, which is one of the most racist pieces of legislation in the world. And those have come at great cost. Our people are not treaty people. We don't have a treaty with the Canadian government. We have never ceded or surrendered our lands. We have never lost our lands in war. We still have full jurisdiction and title over 22,000 square kilometers of Wet'suwet'en territory. In 1997, we went to court. There was a Supreme Court of Canada ruling that the Wet'suwet'en and our neighbors, the Gidimt'en, had never ceded, surrendered our territories, and that our title to our lands have never been extinguished. But the Canadian government has put in place so many policies to take us from our land and to try to undermine our hereditary governance system. They had put in the reserve system that took all of our people off of our 22,000 square kilometers and put them on small parcels of land that were uninhabitable, that nobody else wanted. There were laws in place that made it illegal for us to leave our reserves, to leave those territories, so that we couldn't go out onto our yinta, which is what we call our land. Everything that we rely on and all of the animals and things that we are in relationship with on our territories. One of the other important things to note is that they also put in an imposed government system called the Indian Act Ban Cancel System that was designed to undermine our hereditary governance, our clan system that we make decisions by, that our Bathlats was outlawed, our potlatch system was outlawed, which is our house of governance, for many years. And so we have seen extreme consequences of this. The residential schools were put in place to remove our children from our territories and our families, to try to break our systems of government, to try to break down our people. And those policies have largely been successful. Our people no longer live out on our territories up until our Wet'suwet'en started reoccupying about 10 years ago. Most people live on reserves. The band council systems are what the government recognizes. Even after the court case, they don't recognize our hereditary leadership system, our clan governance system. The name that I hold, Sleydo, has a place in our governance system where I am a supporting chief in our house group to our clan, that I help to advise, to make decisions, to help take care of the territory. And it holds great responsibility. But the government and the police have gone to great lengths in so-called Canada to extinguish that governance system, to extinguish us as Indigenous people, to commit genocide by stealing our children. We see that those things still happen today, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to talk about our governance system a little bit, because this is so important to our struggle and to how we are protecting the land. We don't go by an elected system. We go by our traditional clan governance system. And so we have 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en, and each clan is responsible for our own governance and responsible for taking care of our territories that belong to us for all of our future generations. Every hereditary chief has been mentored, has been trained, has been groomed to take up these responsibilities. And we are one of the only Indigenous nations in so-called BC, British Columbia, that still practices our traditional governance system over and above the imposed band council systems. So we went underground during the potlatch ban to continue to practice our traditional governance system. And so it is still alive and well today in our territories. And this is a huge threat to the Canadian state. This is a huge threat to globalization, a huge threat to capitalism, because we stand on our traditional laws that come from the land, our traditional laws that come from the land that protect the territories for the benefit of everybody, not just the people, for the benefit of the animals and the water and the wildlife and the birds, and especially for our future generations. So we're always thinking about those things. when the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which is a 670-kilometer fracked gas pipeline, was proposed to go through our territory, we went through a series of meetings within our clan governance system over a number of years so that we were informed about what the risks would be. We had meetings with scientists, we had meetings with all of our clan members. And at the end of those several years of meetings, we came to the decision that there was too great of risk to allow this pipeline to come through our territories. We decided that this was too great of risk to allow any pipeline to come through Wet'suwet'en territory. And that's because we have pristine waters. Our Wet'suwet'en, which is the river that we're protecting, that we all live by, is the main salmon spawning river in our territory. And salmon is one of our staple foods for our people. We couldn't exist as Wet'suwet'en people if we didn't have that resource. All of the territories have been already so decimated by logging, by mines, by previous pipelines, that we have very little left to be able to teach our future generations what it means to be Wet'suwet'en people. In the feast hall, when we come into the feast hall and make our laws witnessed by our whole community, by our whole nation, we bring the foods from our yinta. We bring our moose, our salmon, our berries, our medicines. We bring those into the feast hall, and that's what our feast relies on, to gift the people who are witnessing us. So we have a strong connection between the land and our governance system. But Coastal GasLink has wanted to remove us from the territories, and they have been doing that with paramilitary force for the last several years. We have a reoccupation site at Gidimt'en checkpoint, a village site on an old ancient village site that our people used to use to harvest lamprey eels. There's another reoccupation in one of the other clans, the Unistoten. They've been there for 10 years and have built a huge healing lodge, a healing center for our people to come and heal from all of the impacts of colonization. Another one of the clans, the Laksamasu, have reoccupied one of their ancient village sites out on the territory. So our people are starting to move back to our land where we were ripped away and put onto reserves, where our children were taken away and put into residential schools. And now we're on our lands again, teaching our children according to our values and our teachings as Wet'suwet'en people, and according to our hereditary governance system. In the past, Wet'suwet'en people, it's a practice of the government to burn us out of our homes. Many people have been displaced through the burning of their homes and put onto reserves when the Indian agents would come and decide that they didn't want them on that parcel of land anymore because they wanted to use it for development, or they wanted to give it to settlers that came into our territories. They would burn down our houses and move us, and people would be desolate and be carrying all their belongings on their back. And that's happening again today. Coastal GasLink and the police in this country, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they have come and burned down our homes on our yinta. In November was the latest incident of that, when the police raided Coyote Camp, one of the occupation sites to protect the Wet'suwet'en River. They burned down the cabin of the daughter of our house chief, of our head chief Was. They've been doing this since the time of colonization, and they're continuing to do this. When there's been 3 militarized raids on Wet'suwet'en territory in the last 3 years. In 2019, there was ERT teams, sniper rifle, canine units, and lethal overwatch that they came to remove Wet'suwet'en people from our territories, for occupying our land, for protecting our lands from the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And so they came in and they arrested 14 people, including myself and including one of our elders in the Gidimt'en clan. And they removed us from our territories and jailed us and are criminalizing us from that time. In 2020, there was another series of militarized raids on our territory. Over the course of 5 days, they raided and arrested and criminalized people at 4 different encampments and village sites in our territory. At that point, there were 27 arrests that happened, including some of our hereditary chiefs and the matriarchs of the Gidimt'en clan. And they used, again, lethal overwatch. They had canine units. When you go out into our territories, it feels like a war zone when the raids are happening in our lands. There are helicopters flying overhead. There are snipers that are hiding in trees. There are snipers that are hiding behind vehicles. They're trained on you, and we are being removed from our territories by gunpoint. The latest raid that happened was in November of 2021, when we were occupying a village or a space by the Witsinqua River to try to protect the river from being drilled underneath by the Coastal GasLink pipeline project. And the police came in, and over 2 days, they raided the village site at Gidimt'en checkpoint. And then they came up to Coyote Camp and they raided that village, and they were dropping TAC teams, militarized RCMP, by helicopter to surround us. And there was myself and some other Indigenous youth in a home, in a tiny home that we were living in there. And they came in and they had attack dogs standing at the door, and you could hear them snarling and barking and whining to try to get off of their leash, try to get at us. They had sniper rifles hiding behind heavy machinery, pointed and trained on us. And when they couldn't get in because they didn't have a search warrant or they didn't have an arrest warrant, they used our own axe and they used our own chainsaw to chainsaw down the door, and remove us at gunpoint with semi-automatic weapons and arrest us and remove us from our territory. And then we spent 5 days in 7 different prison cells in 3 different towns, before we were finally released from jail. This is all while Canada and BC have signed on to the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, at a time where BC, the provincial government, is releasing the DRIPA, the implementation of the UNDRIP, and the policies and laws that are supposed to protect Indigenous rights, that are supposed to uphold Indigenous governance systems, and allow us to live free. It's very well, there's been so many research projects, there have been so many reports. There was the national inquiry on the murdered and missing Indigenous women in our territories that said that projects like this, industrial projects in our territories, increase the rates of violence and murder against our Indigenous women. And we have 3 or 4 man camps in Wet'suwet'en territory, full of 500 foreign workers that come from elsewhere outside of our territories, that put our people at risk. The rates of crime, the rates of murder, the rates of homicides in the nearby communities has increased. Our people are struggling to survive on our territories, and they're using the police and militarized RCMP to come in and forcibly remove us from our lands. So this is a continuation of the very policies and practices that have been in place since contact to get rid of Indigenous people on our own territories. This is the project that has been in place, that we are well aware of, that we know intimately. It's in our blood, it's in our bones, that we are being removed from our lands at gunpoint and threatened with death or threatened with jail in order for them to push through their industrial projects to benefit these corporations, these private corporations. It's not even benefiting BC, it's not even benefiting Canada, it's benefiting these private corporations that they are selling our lands off to, that they are using our tax dollars to pay the RCMP. At this point in our village site, the RCMP are now coming in still. For the last month, since the beginning of March, they've been coming into our village site 4 to 8 times a day. There are dozens of police on our territory occupying our lands and forcibly entering our village sites to harass people, to intimidate people, to make our lives unbearable to live on our own land peacefully. These are the things that we cannot let happen and continue. If this is allowed to continue on, then we know that it's going to get worse. We know that they will continue to push it. It's becoming normalized that we can be terrorized like this on our own lands. And we know that it can get much worse. And so we're asking people to stand with us, to put pressure on the governments, to put pressure on Canada, to ensure that this does not continue in 2022, and that we don't get to a point where we are extinguished as Indigenous people on our own land.
Thank you very much for what you've shared with us. And I know people are going to want to ask questions. And I know that when we hear from Mazin Qumsiyeh, we're going to hear some more on exactly the same kind of subject. So I would like, with this, I'd like to introduce Mazin. Mazin Qumsiyeh teaches and does research at Bethlehem and Birzeit universities. And he was previously on the faculty of the University of Tennessee, Duke University, and Yale University. He returned to Palestine in 2008 with his wife, and he started a number of institutions and projects like a clinical genetics laboratory for cancer and other patients. They have founded and run the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Mazin has published over 140 scientific papers on all kinds of topics, from cultural heritage to biodiversity to cancer, and also a number of books on the same subject. And I think he will be, he can speak for himself. I will put some information about where you can learn more in the chat. And Mazin, thank you very much for coming and talking about the way in which settler colonialism has created an environmental crisis in Palestine.
Okay, I don't know why I cannot share the whole screen. I'm supposed to be able to share a whole screen so that I can put it full.
Mazin, when it is sharing, we see your whole screen. We see it fine.
To get it bigger and then this, but anyways, here we go. Is that better? You can see it okay now?
It's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. First, I really appreciate the invitation, and I was very impressed by what Sleydo had said, and really, the juxtaposition of the photos that you all did, the photo montage in the beginning. Sometimes you couldn't tell whether the picture was in North America or was in Palestine. And that's indeed what it is. It's we're both subjected to the same kind of colonial ethnic cleansing attempt at our people. And so I will try to be very brief to leave enough time for questions. But Palestine is here. It's a very important area. Even human migrations, and Sleydo, your ancestors came through Palestine to to North America about 15,000, 20,000 years ago. Palestine, of course, being a fertile area, was the Fertile Crescent, where humans also developed agriculture, first domesticated plants like wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, etc. We, the native Palestinians, the first depiction in writing, actually, of self-description describes it as the land of Canaan, or Canaan, more probably, or Canaan, which means somebody who's satisfied with their lot in life. And this is a land that's very rich in natural resources and habitats. And that's why it also, when people invented agriculture and had time on their hand, they also invented things like the alphabet, which you use now. The ABCs come from us. And people continued to survive on the land up until 1948, when Israel was created, and switch rapidly happened, whereby we went from 70% of the people being subsistence farmers to rapidly becoming refugees, displaced people. Now, of course, humans face a lot of challenges with the environment, climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, overexploitation, invasive species. And we can add in Palestine and in North America also settler colonialism, because settler colonialism is very damaging to the environment. If you recall, the white European settlers in North America, for example, killed over 2 million buffaloes, and that's to deny the natives, the indigenous people, the food they need. When Israel was created, over 500 Palestinian communities were depopulated. You can see the map on the right side with these dots on it. You can read more about this in Ilan Pape's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And slowly Palestine has been shrinking so that we ended up in reservations, in the same way that in the US, for example, the Native Americans ended up in reservations, or the areas you see on the right side of the map on the bottom. Actually, the maps on the bottom are the ones that inspired the shrinking map of Palestine by my son when he went to school, middle school in North Carolina. And that's when he saw the map of a shrinking US and was inspired to draw the first map of shrinking Palestine.
Excuse me, Mazin, I think you need to start your slideshow on the PowerPoint in order to be moving through the slides, because we're not seeing the different
You're not
slides.
seeing?
No, I think you have to
Why is it?
slideshow and start slideshow. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
How do I mean, I see it connected, I see it changing on my,
Now it has changed, but if you hit up at the top menu, slideshow,
menu.
at the top of your window,
Let's see, menu.
well, just at the top, across the top, all the options where it says slideshow, right up, there you go. And now over from current slide, you might want to start. Okay.
Sorry, but you have to see this slide. You
Okay.
see it? Shrinking US?
No, hit, move back one slide. There we go. Okay, sorry.
If I leave it like this, but then it's small.
It's
okay?
big for us.
All right, well, I'll just run through these very quickly because you apparently were not seeing them. So anyways, we have threats, and these are the villages that were depopulated, and then sorry about that. This is a shrinking map of Palestine that was inspired by the shrinking map of the US. And of course, Palestinians resisted this colonization, and we paid a heavy price for it. Over 100,000 of us were killed since 1948. Over 90 children just in 2021, for example. Over 800,000 have been injured, over 900,000 have been detained and imprisoned. This is me being arrested and detained a few times. Now, the environmental impact of colonization is many and severe, basically. It includes, for example, when they uprooted those 500 villages, they uprooted all the trees around them, and they planted pine trees, which pine trees are more susceptible to fires. So this is from a fire in West Jerusalem just this past summer. And you can see it exposed the terraces that the Palestinians have built for thousands of years. There's the mega projects like diversion of the water from the Jordan Valley, from the headwater, Lake Tiberias to the west. And this resulted in drying up of the Jordan Valley and the River Jordan basically becoming a stream, denying livelihood for the indigenous people, but also for wildlife. There was the draining of the wetlands of the Hula area, which also resulted in loss of hundreds of species. There is the issue of water and natural resource allocation. Basically, Israel colonial settlers steal our water, and they barely allow us enough to survive. In fact, in Gaza, 95% of the water is not drinkable, and there's not really enough water to survive. We get less than what the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living. This is what they do in building settlements, uprooting mountains, trees, and making Jewish-only colonies built on stolen Palestinian land. This is happening as we speak every day. And you know, putting also industrial settlements, really destructive environmentally, that are dumping their toxic waste on the local population. My master's students studied this and showed genotoxic effects, DNA damage, chromosome breaks, increase in cancer rates, congenital birth defects, infertility, skin disorders, and so on. The destruction continues apace. Every day there's more destructions, more homes destroyed, more trees destroyed, more people uprooted from their land, etc. And I would say the whole humanity is really not paying attention, and the whole humanity also is going down a cliff, if like the lemmings, if you want. And we are the occasional people who try to say, wait a minute, slow down, this is not the way to go. So what's the answer to what ails us all, whether it ails me or people in natives, tribes in what's now called Canada and the US and so forth? I think what needs to be done is, of course, resistance. And here I talk about all forms of resistance. I wrote a whole book about popular resistance in Palestine. If anybody is interested, I could send it to you as a PDF. You can read it. I'm not a fan of copyright. But anyways, resistance in our case, of course, is an existential issue, just like this frog. And so we have an institute here also, it's called Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which is interested in basically having sustainable humans, communities, and sustainable natural communities in the face of colonization. I'll flip through some slides in the Institute. Basically, you can see what we have. We also grow our own food. Some of it, at least, we try. We have aquaponics, hydroponics, we have vegetable garden. We now have a lot of beans that need to be harvested, guys. We have some work with the farmers to increase their production and encourage them to use permaculture methods. We work with the women cooperatives in the villages that are targeted to basically market their products and also make products, even making products like soap and cosmetics and other things. We work with children regularly. We do educational programs with children on a regular basis every week. And children can come to the museum, enjoy themselves, work with us, touch, feel, explore, make pickled olives, whatever. So we have good facilities now. We have good library, good laboratories. We have a herbarium. We have a museum of natural history and a museum of ethnography also. And we we work on the climate change issues. We work, our motto, by the way, or our slogan is respect, respect for ourselves, respect for others, and respect for nature. And we think that this is important, as opposed to, of course, the lack of respect as shown by the colonial power to all of these things. We welcome volunteers, international and local. Actually, I'm sitting here with a group of 6, 7 volunteers who are having dinner, iftar, because Ramadan breaking the fast. So this is what volunteers do. They can work in the garden, they can pick olives, they can do various things. These volunteers actually built this biogas unit on their own in one day. So there are lots of things to do, lots of activities. As far as what you can do from where you are, we encourage you to engage in boycott, divestment, sanctions, just like we did with South Africa to stop apartheid. And this is important, in our opinion, to increase the pressure on this apartheid state of Israel. This is our website, palestinenature.org, and email is info@palestinenature.org. So I'm happy if you can connect with us. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mazin. It's really, when you think about the fact that you are under military occupation, what you have accomplished is amazing. So I want to point out to people that they can't forget the context. The context is not that much different than Sleydo described for the Wet'suwet'en people, of constant military raids and purposeful destruction of what you create. So I'm hoping that people will put questions in the chat, because you both all had so much to say, but I do have a couple of questions for you. So I'm going to start with that. And people should be aware that I think we will email the link for this presentation to everybody, the recording, but we will also post it on our websites. So I want to start by just, I don't know, I have so many questions, but I want to start by asking you, can you talk a little bit about strategy? And the maybe looking at direct action versus a legal strategy centered on the courts, or other means of resistance. And that's really a question for both of you. So please jump in, whoever would like to start. Oops, you're muted, Sleydo, so you have to unmute. Okay, go for it.
Okay, sure, thanks. This is an interesting one. We've taken the approach, the hereditary chiefs have taken the approach that to use all strategies. We have attempted many court battles. We have lost every single one against the Coastal GasLink pipeline. The courts in Canada are not designed to take into account Indigenous rights, or even the court ruling that Wet'suwet'en have never extinguished our title. So the courts are not in our favor. We've spent many thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we've never benefited really from any of those court proceedings. And so that has, one of the main strategies has been to reoccupy our territories, because there was a reason why they moved us off our territories, so that we wouldn't get in the way, and so that we wouldn't have that relationship and we wouldn't be strong. When we are on our land, when we are teaching our children on our land, we are stronger. We have our ancestors with us. We have the knowledge of the land. We know exactly what's going on. And so that has been one of the main strategies, which is why there are now many reoccupation sites in Wet'suwet'en territory. But also direct action is one of, we have been backed into a corner. We have been pushed into a corner where we've, experienced so much violence and experienced so much repression that often that's the only way to get anything done. That's the only way to have, a strong resistance that can be growing. And so it also brings attention to the issue. We've tried petitions, we've tried, writing our governments, we've tried everything. We have a lot of support, and we're so appreciative of all of our supporters that have come up with all of these different ways to try to amplify our message and to try to put pressure on this company. Currently, we are doing a huge divestment campaign against the RBC, which is one of the biggest banks that's funding the CGL project. And so we're working at every angle that we possibly can, and nothing is off the table. We have to protect our land from this pipeline. And it's a bigger issue and people see it. So they want to get involved because they see that this is not just an issue of one pipeline. It's an issue of Indigenous sovereignty and our Indigenous rights and the planet, that we cannot sustain projects like this for the entire world.
Well, thanks for that, Sleydo. And actually, we want to come back to that, but I would like to ask the same question for Mazin about how, and maybe also particularly about the looking at the apartheid wall and the tactics, what the environmental costs have been of that, and the tactics that you might use to oppose that and other environmental damage that comes from along with settler colonialism.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of strategies, basically, I mean, I don't want to, like Sleydo said, it's hard sometimes to think that Native people don't get out, sit down and plot a strategy that's long-term with milestones and deliverables as we do, let's say, projects or anything like that. Most of the time, Native people, Indigenous people, they engage in resistance because it's natural. It's like I said, it's existential. They engage in resistance. The forms of resistance they choose are many forms of resistance, sometimes civil disobedience, sometimes engaging in economic sabotage, sometimes even violence against the colonial settlers. But these are various forms of resistance, which collectively, of course, they delay sometimes. Rarely do we, as Indigenous people, by the way, succeed in the sense of reversing the situation to come back completely to what it was before. In fact, if you think of the colonial systems around the world, just about every country was subjected to colonialism. The only country where Indigenous people really managed to get the colonialists off their land and back to where they came from is Algeria, perhaps one other country, perhaps Ethiopia and Libya. But this is rare, and it was very bloody, and it cost 2 million Algerian lives, and unfortunately also was not nice for the colonialists either, because they had to pack their bags and go. In the case of Algeria, 1 million Algerians to France. Many of them have never seen France in their lives. There were 6, 7, or 8 generations in Algeria. But again, this is very rare it would happen that way. The other two scenarios that happen and we see happening is there's a scenario of genocide that has happened in the US and in Australia, where the natives are butchered to such a large extent that there's a quote unquote few manageable ones, even though I don't think they're manageable. They are still resisting, of course, and the story is not finished. Then there's the third option or third scenario, which is the most likely scenario, which is that the descendants of the colonized and the descendants of the colonizers live together in one country. This has happened in South America, Central America, Mexico, Caribbean islands, Southeast Asia, South Africa, of course, and many other countries. One could argue Canada is moving in that direction eventually. But we will see. I would love to hear Sleydo's views on this in terms of the prognosis or the likelihood of what will happen. But in terms of strategies, no, I'm sorry, there's no single strategy of liberation. There is a resistance And sometimes the resistance, like in South Africa, gets international support, and sometimes they don't. Like we are not getting international support. Palestinians are left on their own, and we have 8 million refugees now, and everybody's now talking about Ukraine as if it's the only problem in the world, you know. And there's ethnic cleansing happening every day here in Palestine or many other places. In Yemen, there's genocide in Yemen happening. Nobody is talking about that. So I think, you know, one has to question Western morality and Western hypocrisy, I should say, that's out there in the media. And I think we have an obligation to keep doing what we are doing regardless of the outcome. It's because we follow our conscience and because it's what makes us be able to look ourselves in the mirror in the morning and say, I've done what I could. Whether we succeed or not, I mean, I don't know. I think of it like, you know, slavery, of course, was there for hundreds of years. And if I was born a slave 200 or 300 years ago, I would hope that I would be a field slave resisting rather than a house slave accepting the commands of my master.
What I wanted to go back to is I have several questions of people just asking, what is the best way for people in the U.S. to support you? And I think Mazin talked a little bit about boycott, divested, and sanctions. So I'm going to take it first to you, Sleydo. Is it helpful for people to come in person to stand with you? What would you really ask people to do to be your ally?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways to support us that are on our website. We do often will put a call out for people to come to the INTA, to come to the territory and stand with us. And so it's really important for people to prepare for that call out. The CGL has not drilled under the Gidimt'en yet. This is something that is imminent. It's something that's continuing to go on. There has been, you know, direct action in several different ways that have delayed this from happening. This is one of the biggest catastrophes that could happen to our lands. We drink the water out of the river. We use it for our cooking. We drink it every day. My children drink that water. If they drill under the river, we will no longer be able to drink the water, even if everything goes fine. It will disrupt our salmon. It will devastate us. And so when we are preparing, you know, for any sort of destruction like that, it's often helpful for people to prepare themselves in their own lives to come to the INTA with skills, to be able to start a fire, to come prepared, to be staying outside, you know, to be self-sustainable as much as possible, and to come and put their bodies on the line, as our bodies have been, you know, have been on the line for so many years and generations, that it's helpful in that way. When we put a call out for people, it's also for if there's different groups or organizations to build those relationships ahead of time with us, so that we know who we can call on and that people can be ready and prepared to come to the INTA. We also have other things that are going on, like the divestment campaign. In the US, they're like KKR is part owner. There's a lot of companies that are based in the US and banks that are based in the US that are funding this project and that own this project. So I think KKR's headquarters are in New York. And so being available and coming out to the rallies, coming out to the demonstrations, organizing amongst yourselves to be able to take part in supporting us in our campaigns against the investors and insurers of this project as well are really important ways to support us. Thank you.
Mazin, do you want to add anything to what you had mentioned?
No, I mean, on my website, which I'll put in the chat room, qumsiyeh.org, I have 72 ways that people can help in the situation, Palestine, even from abroad. So you're welcome to look at that. But most important, people should educate themselves first and then follow their passion, their interest, and they'll find a way to help.
Okay. Have either of you found that any of the major environmental NGOs have stood up with you? There's the Sierra Club, there's the Friends of the Earth. I'm sure there are many more that I don't know about, but I'm just wondering if any of these organizations that have millions and millions of dollars and thousands of members are actually willing to stand up.
Yeah, so we actually work with probably almost everybody. And there are some organizations and NGOs that don't have a mandate for fracked gas pipelines, have mandates for certain things. And so that limits the way that they can support us. But we do have good relationships with so many different organizations that have been really helpful to us, that are, helping us build our capacity, because we are small. Gidimt'en we have a small house group, and so we need a lot of capacity support and a lot of administrative support and a lot of those kinds of things. And so a lot of different organizations have been very helpful and have been doing the back end work with us without, needing to be at the forefront and taking credit for all of that, which is very important for us. And we're really pushing that agenda because, we need the support and the help, but we don't need somebody speaking for us. And we don't need an organization taking the credit for all of the hard work that we're doing on the ground. And so we find that the NGOs have been really respectful of that, which is a shift in so-called Canada. This has not been the experience of Indigenous people in the past. And so I'm glad to see that changing, and that we do have that support from different organizations.
And Mazin?
Well, the short answer is no. The international organizations like the Worldwide Fund and IUCN and others are not interested in entering a political minefield that is Palestine/Israel, because immediately they are attacked by a very strong Zionist lobby in the US. I'll give you a very simple example. We lobbied the Sierra Club to cancel a trip that they have planned here, which greenwashes colonization, basically working only with Israelis, supposedly to watch birds. And they claimed that, at first they resisted. They said they're not political. Anyway, they canceled the trip, and then within 24 hours, they reinstated it because they received a lot of lobby power from the Zionists on this. And then when we asked them about it, they said, well, we don't want to get into politics. And then a week later, they issued a statement in support of Ukraine against Russia, which shows you that they are political. They are not independent of politics. So I think we have a problem. And then the question that was in the chat about interest from Israeli environmental groups, that's even worse. The international environmental groups, they support colonization indirectly. Those ones in Israel, they support colonization directly, and they are agents of colonization. So they're not interested in defending or in working for environmental justice. I have written to them before when I was a young man, naive enough to think that the Zionist organization with the words environmental agency or environmental group, that they would care about uprooting 2,000-year-old olive trees or bulldozing ancient forests or diverting water from the Jordan River or basically bombing sewage treatment facilities in Gaza. I wrote to them, and to be honest, I get zero answer. And if anything, they stood with the occupiers because they are part of the system. Israel is a system of colonialism, in which its agencies, its universities, its environmental groups, its academics, they all work, they all serve in the army, they all support wars, they all support colonizing Palestine. So I find that a rather hopeless case that we would get them involved in defending anything that has to do with the environment here.
I'm wondering, besides the things that you talked about, are there things that people in this country, or this country as the U.S., should be doing to be more supportive? You talked about, Sleydo talked about the looking at KKR, for example, as a big investor, and there is a campaign focused on KKR. We know about that. I'm wondering how many people on this call really knew about the Sierra Club issue, for example, in Palestine. Is there a way that we could just call on our own grassroots resources to name and shame the I don't know, the institutions that are basically giving lip service to protecting the environment, but not doing it when it's inconvenient?
Yeah, you can write to the Sierra Club of each person here, and there are 40 some people here. If each one writes a letter, maybe they will pay attention. It will balance the Zionist lobby that they get to support basically greenwashing. Greenwashing, by the way, is like also pinkwashing. Israel also sells itself as gay-friendly, etc., and and tries to woo people. It's mostly for propaganda. So greenwashing, you know, Israel as an agenda existed with Israel even from its founding. You know, even before it was founded, they used to have these blue boxes asking people to donate money to plant a tree in Israel. They never told you that this was to uproot trees and to uproot Palestinians and to uproot villages and occasionally to plant very few trees, but they're all monoculture of European pine trees that are more susceptible to fire. So anyways, I think people need to educate other people and need to pressure those so-called environmental groups who are, you know, follow the usual, PEP, as I call it, progressive except for Palestine kind of philosophy. We are progressive, we are for the environment, but if you talk about Palestine, that's red line because we don't want to be labeled anti-Semitic, or we don't want this, or we don't want that, and we don't want some guys to come pressure us.
I was going to say maybe we can expand the definition of PEP to progressive except pressure.
Yeah,
We find that sometimes they don't
right.
stand up too well to the pressure. I don't know if I don't see any other questions from the audience, and I would like to thank you all. We have time that we could continue if we had questions, but I don't see any. It's been a really great discussion. For people who want to take a look at what we talked about, as I said, the recording, it'll be available on the 2 websites that I sent you. I just sent everybody a message saying when our next organizing meeting would be, and you can also find the information about how to attend that at the same 2 websites that are listed there. And I want to thank our panelists. It's not easy when you're being targeted and you're under pressure every single day to actually talk about it. And you want to talk about it, but there's a big emotional toll, and I want to recognize that. We really appreciate so much that you have taken the time to do this, and I hope that everyone on this Zoom will make the effort to do what they can to support you.
Felice, I put my email in the chat room. If people want to write to me, I'm also happy to share the letter I wrote to Sierra Club, and they can maybe do something from their end.
That's great. And I think, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I guess the other thing is, if Sleydo, I am on Mazin's mailing list. Maybe you can just say if you have a mailing list, how we can be on it, or
Yeah, just email me or put your email in the chat room. I can
if
get
you want,
it now or whenever. Just email me at that
because
email. I'll add you to. Basically, it's a weekly
great.
email with action-oriented items related to Palestine
because
and
here we are, the
global
other,
environmental issues.
yeah, we're thousands of miles away, so we want to find ways to stay in touch. But thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I think everybody should just unmute themselves. Will you do that, you all who are on the Zoom? And just let's give one round of applause, because these two panelists totally deserve it. Okay, are we ready? Unmute everybody. Ellen, I need your help.
Everybody is now able to unmute themselves. We took off the lock.
Oh, I
So
see. Okay,
unmute yourself.
unmute. Okay, we're done. Thank you. Thank you.
We're on.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.